The scent of old leather and mothballs always clung to Grandma Elara's house, a smell that was comforting until the day it wasn't. It was the day of the reading of the will, 3 weeks after the funeral. The air in the solicitor's office was sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the earthy decay of the cemetery. I sat between my 2 older brothers, Marcus and Julian, feeling the familiar, uncomfortable weight of being the youngest, the afterthought. I was 44, a mechanical drafter, a man who built precise blueprints, yet my life felt like a chaotic sketch. Marcus, a successful venture capitalist, adjusted his bespoke suit. Julian, a corporate lawyer, tapped his Montblanc pen impatiently on the mahogany table. They were the golden boys, the ones who inherited Grandma Elara's sharp intellect and sharper business acumen. I inherited her eyes, they said, a pale, watery blue, but none of her fortune or favor. I just wanted this formality over with. I wanted to go home to my quiet life, my drafting table, and the predictable rhythm of my T-square. Mr. Henderson, the family solicitor, cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the hushed room. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, as if he already knew the storm he was about to unleash. He read the preamble, the legal jargon washing over me until he reached the distribution section. Marcus received the controlling interest in Lowry Holdings, valued conservatively at $34 million. Julian received the remaining assets, including the ancestral home and the liquid capital, totaling another $34 million. My heart hammered, not from greed, but from the realization of the pattern repeating itself. Then Mr. Henderson paused, looking directly at me. My throat tightened. This was the moment for the token inheritance, the antique watch, the small trust fund, the gesture of inclusion. He didn't offer a gesture. He read the final clause about me, Raymond Lowry. To my grandson Raymond, I leave the contents of the small, locked box currently residing in the attic safe, along with the explicit instruction that he never open it unless he truly understands the meaning of responsibility. That was it. A locked box, responsibility. The total monetary value listed next to my name was 0. Marcus let out a soft, almost imperceptible scoff. Julian just smirked, a tight, knowing curve of his lips. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the frantic pulse in my ears. I felt a wave of icy coldness wash over me, a familiar sensation of being erased. I stood up, pushing my chair back, the scrape of wood on the polished floor echoing the sudden sharp pain in my chest. I didn't need their money, but I needed to know why. Why the exclusion? Why the cryptic insult? Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again, his gaze apologetic, professional. He slid a small, tarnished brass key across the table toward me. It felt heavy, cold, and utterly insignificant. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. I saw something that made my stomach drop. Etched into the key's head, almost invisible under the patina, was a tiny stylized letter M. The drive home was a blur of gray highway and stinging rain. The brass key felt like a branding iron in my palm. $68 million split between my brothers, and I got a cryptic homework assignment and a 0 balance. It wasn't the money. It was the message. Grandma Elara was a woman who communicated exclusively through financial transactions and carefully worded insults. This was her final, definitive statement on my worth. I pulled into my driveway, the small, unassuming house a stark contrast to the sprawling estates my brothers now controlled. I found my wife, Clara, in the kitchen, kneading dough with focused intensity, the rhythmic thudding a temporary balm to my frayed nerves. She looked up, her expression immediately softening when she saw my face. She knew. She knew the history, the subtle cruelties, the decades of being overlooked. I didn't have to say a word. I just dropped the key onto the butcher block island. It made a small, metallic clink. "The box," I finally managed, my voice rough. "She left me a locked box." And a lecture on responsibility. Clara stopped kneading, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Raymond, I am so sorry. That is unbelievably cruel, even for her." She came around the island and hugged me tightly, the scent of yeast and lavender momentarily grounding me. I leaned into her embrace, feeling the exhaustion of years of trying to prove myself to a woman who had already made up her mind. "I need to go to the attic," I said, pulling back. "I need to know what's in that box. I need to know what responsibility means to a woman who just disinherited her own grandson." The Lowry ancestral home, now Julian's, felt like a museum of my inadequacy. I called him, keeping my tone neutral, professional. "Julian, I need access to the attic safe. Per the will." Julian's voice was smooth, edged with condescension. "Oh, the little consolation prize. Sure, Raymond. I'll have the housekeeper let you in tomorrow morning. Don't touch anything, though. The house is being appraised." The next morning, the house was silent and cold. Mrs. Petrov, the housekeeper, a woman whose face was permanently etched with exhaustion, let me in without a word, her eyes avoiding mine. The attic was exactly as I remembered, dusty, hot, and cavernous, filled with the ghosts of Lowry history. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dry wood. The safe was hidden behind a stack of steamer trunks near the chimney, a heavy black iron box bolted into the floorboards. I knelt, the dust immediately coating my jeans. The brass key fit the lock perfectly. With a heavy metallic groan, the safe door swung open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was the box. It was small, made of dark, polished oak, and surprisingly light. I lifted it out, my fingers tracing the smooth, cold wood. There was no latch, only a tiny, almost invisible seam. I looked closer. The box was sealed, not locked. I realized the key wasn't for the box. It was for the safe. I turned the box over, searching for a hinge or a clasp. Nothing. It was a solid piece of craftsmanship. I ran my thumb over the wood again, and then I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible carving on the bottom panel. It was a single, tiny word carved with precision. The word was mistake. She whispered one sentence that changed everything. "You were always the mistake, Raymond." The word mistake felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just a word. It was the summation of 4 decades of subtle rejection, finally articulated in Grandma Ilara's precise, surgical manner. I sat on the dusty attic floor, the oak box heavy in my lap, trying to reconcile the elegant craftsmanship with the brutal message. This was her legacy to me, a reminder of my perceived failure to meet the Lowry standard. I took the box home, placing it on my drafting table under the harsh glare of my architectural lamp. I studied it like a complex blueprint, searching for the mechanism to open it. If it wasn't a lock, it had to be a puzzle. I tapped the wood, listening for hollow spots. I pressed the corners, looking for a hidden button. My analytical mind, usually so adept at solving spatial problems, was paralyzed by the emotional context. Clara watched me that evening, her concern palpable. "Raymond, maybe you should just put it away. It's just designed to hurt you." "No," I insisted, running my fingers over the smooth, cold surface. "I need to understand the mechanism. I need to understand her mechanism." "Why this? Why now?" I worked late into the night, ignoring the exhaustion creeping into my bones. The box was seamless. I tried heat, thinking perhaps the wood expanded differently. I tried cold. Nothing. I was about to give up, to smash the damn thing with a hammer, when I noticed something under the intense light. Along the top edge where the lid met the body, there was a hairline fracture, almost invisible. It wasn't a flaw. It was a score mark. I grabbed my finest mechanical scribe, a tool I used for the most delicate line work. Gently, I inserted the tip into the score mark and applied the slightest pressure. A faint click echoed in the quiet room. The lid didn't open, but it shifted ever so slightly. I realized the box was held shut by magnetic latches, triggered by pressure points. It was a simple, yet elegant, design requiring precision, not force. I found the second pressure point on the opposite side. Click. The box remained closed. I searched for the third. It was hidden beneath the carved word mistake, requiring me to press down on the insult itself. I hesitated, then pushed. Click. The lid sprang open silently. The air that escaped wasn't the expected scent of old paper or dried flowers. It was the faint, sharp smell of ozone, like electricity. Inside there was no money, no jewelry, no will codicil. There was only a single folded piece of thick, cream-colored stationery sealed with a wax impression of the Lowry crest. I lifted the letter out, my hands shaking. The paper felt heavy, expensive. I broke the wax seal, the brittle sound loud in the silence. The handwriting was Grandma Ilara's familiar, elegant script, but looser, less controlled than her usual correspondence. The date at the top was only 3 weeks before her death. I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the first line. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my mother, Eleanor Lowry, who had passed away 10 years ago. Eleanor, I have made a terrible error. I saw something that made my stomach drop. The letter wasn't a final cruelty. It was a desperate confession. The letter was long, filling both sides of the heavy stationery. I read the first line again. Eleanor, I have made a terrible error. My mother had been gone for a decade. Why was Grandma writing to her now? And why was this letter, intended for my deceased mother, locked away from me? I felt a sudden dizzying sense of disorientation, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted. I started reading, slowly, carefully, analyzing every word like a legal document. Grandma Ilara's voice, sharp and demanding, seemed to rise from the page. She wrote about the early days of Lowry Holdings, the immense pressure, the ruthless competition. She mentioned my father Thomas only briefly, noting his lack of commercial drive. Then she shifted focus, detailing the births of Marcus and Julian, describing them as necessary assets for the continuation of the family legacy. When she finally mentioned me, the tone changed, becoming brittle and defensive. She wrote about the period surrounding my birth, describing it as a time of immense financial instability for the company. She claimed my mother's pregnancy with me was ill-timed and distracting. This confirmed the narrative I had always suspected. I was the inconvenient child. But then the letter took an unexpected turn. She didn't just reiterate her disappointment. She confessed a specific, significant action. She wrote about a crucial business deal in 1979, the year I was born. Lowry Holdings was on the brink of collapse. She needed a massive, unsecured loan. The only person willing to give it was a shadowy figure named Silas Vance, a man known for his ruthlessness and his obsession with controlling assets. The confession was stark. Vance demanded collateral beyond the company's books. He demanded a personal guarantee. He demanded the firstborn son of the next Lowry generation. I stopped breathing. Marcus was born in 1975. Julian in 1977. I was born in 1979. I reread the sentence, my mind struggling to process the implication. She continued, her script tightening. I told him you were carrying a girl. I lied. I gave him a different guarantee, a contingency for the future, a promissory note tied to the child born in 1979. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost tore the thick paper. She didn't sell me. Not exactly. But she used my existence, my future, as leverage in a desperate financial gamble. She called it the mistake contingency. The word mistake on the box wasn't an insult. It was a label, a legal designation of a liability. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. She thought she'd won, but she hadn't counted on one thing. She hadn't counted on the contingency being activated. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My grandmother hadn't just disinherited me. She had potentially implicated me in a decades-old, high-stakes financial agreement. The letter detailed the terms of the mistake contingency. If Lowry Holdings failed to meet specific growth targets by the year 2023 this year, Silas Vance or his estate would have the right to claim a significant portion of the company's assets, specifically those tied to the 1979 liability. The letter was a frantic attempt by Grandma Ilara to warn my mother, Eleanor, about the danger and to explain why I had been kept out of the company structure and the will. I kept Riemann out of the succession line deliberately, she wrote. If he holds any part of Lowry Holdings, the contingency can be activated against him directly. He must remain financially separate, a ghost in the family ledger. This wasn't cruelty. It was a twisted form of protection. But the protection had failed. She had died before resolving the agreement, leaving me with the label and the threat. The $68 million inheritance to Marcus and Julian suddenly made sense. It was a desperate attempt to consolidate the assets to make them untouchable before Vance could strike. I needed to know who Silas Vance was and if the contingency had been activated. My background as a drafter meant I was meticulous, organized, and good at tracing lines of ownership. This was a blueprint of betrayal, and I was going to trace every junction. I started digging, using my computer, tapping into databases I usually reserved for researching building codes. Silas Vance was a legend in corporate circles, a predator, a man who specialized in hostile takeovers and asset stripping. He died 5 years ago. That meant his estate was now managed by someone else. I found the name Vance Asset Management, run by his son, Elias Vance. Elias Vance was younger, sharper, and rumored to be even more ruthless than his father. I needed to find the original contract. Grandma Ilara mentioned it was stored in a secure location, accessible only by a specific key. The key with the letter M etched into it. The key I had. I pulled the brass key from my pocket, turning it over in the light. The M wasn't for mistake or Marcus. It was for mother or perhaps management. I needed to find the lock that opened. Grandma Ilara had been meticulous about security. The lock wouldn't be obvious. I called Julian again, my voice carefully controlled. Julian, I need to check the safe again. I think Grandma might have stored some old insurance documents there. Raymond, are you serious? Julian sighed, exasperated. It's empty. Just the dust bunnies and your little wooden box. Fine. Be quick. I drove back to the ancestral home that afternoon. Mrs. Petrov let me in, her silence heavy. I went straight to the attic safe. I examined the interior walls, running my hands over the cold iron. Nothing. Then I looked at the floor of the safe. It was covered in a thin, worn layer of velvet. I pulled the velvet back. Beneath it, bolted into the iron floor, was a small, circular lock, barely visible. The brass key fit perfectly. I turned it. What I found stopped me cold. It wasn't a document vault. It was a micro-cassette tape labeled simply 1979. A micro-cassette tape. An artifact of the late 70s, perfectly preserved. Grandma Ilara, ever the strategist, had opted for analog security over digital. Tapes could be destroyed, but they couldn't be hacked. I carefully removed the cassette, the plastic cool against my fingertips. I didn't dare play it in Julian's house. I needed privacy, and more importantly, I needed a working microcassette player. I drove to the nearest electronics repair shop, an old-school place run by a man named Gus who specialized in obsolete technology. Gus looked at the tape, then at me, his bushy eyebrows raised. "Haven't seen one of these in 20 years, son." "What's on it? The secret to cold fusion?" "Something like that," I muttered. Gus found an ancient dusty player in the back, plugged it in, and after a few sputtering noises, it whirred to life. He left me alone in a small, cramped back room, the air smelling of solder and ozone. I pressed play, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The tape hissed for a moment, then Grandma Ilara's voice, younger, sharper, filled the small room. It was a recording of a conversation, clearly clandestine. "Grandma Ilara, G.E. Vance, the terms are unacceptable. You want the entire future of Lowry Holdings. Silas Vance, S.V." A low, gravelly voice. "I want security, Ilara. Your company is a house of cards. I need leverage. The boy. The one due in 79. He is the collateral. G.E. He is a liability, not collateral. But fine. We agree to the mistake contingency. If the 2023 targets are missed, the liability is activated. You take 51% of the assets tied to the 1979 ledger. SV. And if the targets are met? GE. The agreement is void. The promissory note is destroyed. The boy is free." The recording continued, detailing the specific astronomical growth targets Ilara had to meet over the next 4 decades. The targets were impossible, designed to fail. Ilara had knowingly signed a contract she couldn't fulfill, betting the future of her unborn grandson against the immediate survival of her company. I pressed stop, the sudden silence deafening. The tape confirmed the letter. My existence was a financial instrument, a high-risk bond. But the crucial question remained. Had she met the targets? If she had, the agreement was void. If she hadn't, Elias Vance was coming for the assets. I thanked Gus, paid him, and drove straight back to my house. I needed to analyze the Lowry Holdings financials. As a drafter, I understood structure and stress points. I needed to find the stress points in their balance sheet. I spent the next 2 days immersed in public records, corporate filings, and quarterly reports. Lowry Holdings was private, but its subsidiaries were not. I cross-referenced the growth metrics Ilara had outlined in the letter against the actual performance of the company's publicly reported subsidiaries. The results were devastating. Lowry Holdings had struggled significantly in the 90s, barely surviving the dot-com bust. They had missed the 2023 targets by a staggering 18%. The contingency was active. Elias Vance had the right to claim 51% of the assets tied to the 1979 ledger. But what exactly was the 1979 ledger? It was the year one was born, the year the loan was secured. It meant the entire foundation of Lowry Holdings was compromised. I needed to warn my brothers. I called Julian, my voice tight with urgency. "Julian, we have a serious problem. It's about Grandma's will, but it's much bigger." He thought he'd won, but he hadn't counted on one thing. He hadn't counted on the $68 million being the exact amount Elias Vance was coming to collect. Julian's response was immediate and dismissive. "Raymond, I am busy integrating the new assets. I don't have time for your conspiracy theories about Grandma's responsibility box. You got zero. Accept it." "Julian, listen to me," I pleaded, leaning heavily on my desk. The financial reports spread out like evidence of a crime. The zero inheritance wasn't an insult. It was a shield. Grandma signed a contract in 1979 with Silas Vance, a contingency contract. We missed the growth targets. The contract is active. Vance Asset Management is coming for 51% of the assets tied to that 1979 loan. There was a moment of silence on the line, a hesitation that told me I had finally broken through his arrogance. "What are you talking about? Vance? That old shark? He died years ago. His son, Elias Vance, and the amount they are claiming? It's roughly $68 million, Julian. The exact amount you and Marcus just inherited." The realization was chilling. Grandma had transferred the assets to them, hoping the inheritance would shield the money from corporate claims, a desperate, last-minute maneuver. Julian scoffed, regaining his composure. "That's ridiculous. The company is clean. Our lawyers vetted everything." "Did they vet the mistake contingency contract, Julian? Did they check the private ledgers from 1979? Grandma kept that off the books for 40 years. I have her letter and a tape recording confirming the deal." "Send me the documentation," he demanded, his voice now cold and professional, the lawyer taking over. "If this is real, we need to handle it internally. Do not talk to Marcus yet. He'll panic." I emailed him the transcript of the tape and the key excerpts from the letter, omitting the parts that detailed my personal involvement as the liability. I needed him to focus on the corporate threat, not the emotional one. Within an hour, Julian called back. His voice was strained, the arrogance gone, replaced by genuine fear. "Raymond, this is insane." I cross-referenced the dates. The 1979 loan secured the primary manufacturing plant. If Vance claims 51% of the assets tied to that ledger, he effectively claims the entire foundation of Lowry Holdings. "Exactly," I said, feeling a grim satisfaction that my analysis was correct. "Grandma thought by moving the cash to you and Marcus, she could protect it. But the contract is tied to the ledger, not the current ownership. Vance will argue the assets were fraudulently transferred to avoid the claim." Julian needed a scapegoat, and quickly. "We need to find the original contract. It has to be destroyed." "Did she mention where it is?" "She mentioned a secure location, accessible by a specific key." "The key I have," I reminded him. "I found the tape in the safe. The contract must be nearby." Julian agreed to meet me the next morning at the ancestral home. He was finally treating me as an equal, a partner in crisis, not the family mistake. The shift in dynamic was unsettling. I felt a surge of adrenaline, realizing I was no longer just the drafter. I was the custodian of the family's darkest secret. That night, I studied the key again. I focused on the tape recording, listening for any subtle clues. Then I heard a faint, metallic sound just before Ilara spoke about the secure location. It sounded like a heavy door closing. I realized the safe wasn't the final destination. It was just a clue. I felt a sudden sharp clarity. The key wasn't for a lockbox. It was for a vault. I saw something that made my stomach drop. The vault wasn't in the house. It was at the bank where Grandma kept her private accounts. I didn't wait for Julian. I knew if I told him where I thought the contract was, he would try to seize control, perhaps even destroy the evidence, before I fully understood the implications. I had to see the original document, the blueprint of my own betrayal, before I could decide the next move. The next morning, I drove to the First National Bank of Lowry, the institution that had held the family's wealth for generations. I approached the private banking desk, presenting the brass key and Grandma Ilara's death certificate. The banker, a stiff man named Mr. Davies, examined the key with a practiced eye. "Ah, the Lowry vault key," he murmured. "We were instructed by Mrs. Lowry that this key was only to be used by the designated heir, Raymond Lowry, and only after the reading of the will." My heart hammered against my ribs. Designated heir. Not of the money, but of the secret. Mr. Davies led me down into the sublevels, a cold, silent environment protected by layers of steel and concrete. The air here smelled of dust and ozone, reminiscent of the air that escaped the oak box. We stopped before a heavy, unmarked steel door. Mr. Davies inserted his master key, and then I inserted the brass M key. The tumblers turned with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside the small, climate-controlled vault was a single, leather-bound portfolio lying on a steel shelf. I opened it. The first document was the original contract, the Vance Lowry Contingency Agreement, 1979. It was signed by Elara Lowry and Silas Vance. The terms were exactly as described in the letter and the tape, detailing the astronomical growth targets and the activation clause tied to the 1979 liability, which was me. But there was a second document underneath, a codicil dated 2019, 4 years before her death. I unfolded it, my hands trembling. This codicil was addressed directly to Elias Vance. In it, Elara admitted the targets had been missed. She acknowledged that the contingency was active, but she also issued a final challenge. She wrote that the 1979 liability Raymond Lowry was now 40 years old, a capable, independent man. She stated that if Elias Vance wanted to claim the assets, he would have to prove that Raymond Lowry was truly a mistake, incapable of managing the assets or defending the company. If I, Raymond, could successfully defend Lowry Holdings against Vance's claim, the contingency would be voided and the assets would be secured for my brothers. Grandma Elara hadn't just protected her company. She had set up a final, lethal test for me. She had made me the sole defender of the family fortune, a role she had spent 40 years denying me. The zero inheritance wasn't a punishment. It was the entry fee into a corporate death match. I took photographs of everything, then carefully replaced the documents. I needed to confront Julian and Marcus, not with theories, but with the cold, hard facts of their impending financial ruin. I called Julian from the bank lobby. "Julian, I found the contract. It's worse than we thought. Grandma didn't just try to protect the money. She set up a final condition. Elias Vance is coming for the company, but he has to go through me first." Julian's voice was frantic. "What? What kind of condition?" "Raymond, we need to destroy that contract." "No," I said, my voice firm, feeling a new, steel-like resolve. "We can't destroy it. It's the only thing keeping the $68 million out of Vance's hands right now. It's a legal challenge, and I'm going to accept it." She whispered one sentence that changed everything. "You must defend the company, Raymond, or lose everything." The confrontation with my brothers took place that evening in Julian's new library, a room smelling of expensive leather and unread books. I laid out the evidence, the letter, the tape transcript, and the photographs of the contingency agreement and the 2019 codicil. Marcus and Julian read the documents in stunned silence, their faces pale under the crystal chandelier light. Marcus, the venture capitalist, was the first to react, his composure fracturing. "This is insane. She gambled the entire company on a baby? And she made you the gatekeeper? The one she always called useless?" "She called me the mistake liability," I corrected him, the words tasting like ash. "And yes, she made me the gatekeeper. The codicil states that if I successfully defend Lowry Holdings from Elias Vance's claim, the contract is voided and your inheritance is safe. If I fail, Vance takes the assets." Julian, ever the lawyer, focused on the legal loophole. "We need to hire the best corporate defense team. We can argue duress, fraudulent contract, anything." "Vance is already moving," I countered, pulling out a printout of a recent Seek filing I had found that morning. "He's quietly acquiring shares in the publicly traded subsidiaries. He knows the contingency is active. He's waiting for the legal window to open." Marcus looked at me, His eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing panic. Why you, Raymond? Why didn't she just void the contract herself? Why put the fate of $68 million on the shoulders of the family drafter? Because she needed someone who was completely clean, I explained, leaning forward, my hands flat on the polished wood. Someone who had zero financial connection to Lowry Holdings. If I had been an heir, Vance could have targeted me directly. I was the ghost in the ledger, the one who could fight from the outside. But there was a deeper reason, a psychological one that resonated with my analytical mind. She also wanted to see if I was worthy. She spent my whole life telling me I was a mistake. This is her final, cruel test. Prove you are not a mistake by saving the fortune I denied you. Julian looked at Marcus, and for the first time I saw a flicker of respect, or perhaps desperation, in his eyes. Raymond, you need to lead this defense. We'll give you whatever resources you need. Lawyers, accountants. No, I interrupted, shaking my head. If I bring in your corporate lawyers, Vance will smell weakness. This has to be surgical, precise. I know the blueprints of this company better than you do, Julian. I've been analyzing the structure from the outside for decades. I need to find the pressure point in Vance's claim. I needed to understand Elias Vance. I needed to know his motivation. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the power, the final humiliation of the Lowry family. I decided my first move had to be direct. I had to meet the enemy. I told my brothers to stay silent, to act as if nothing was wrong. I would initiate contact with Elias Vance. I needed to gauge his strategy, his arrogance. I needed to see the man who thought he could erase me and my family's legacy. I left the library, the weight of the $68 million now resting squarely on my shoulders. I saw something that made my stomach drop. On my phone, I had received an anonymous text message. Vance knows you have the key. Be careful what you open next. The anonymous text message was a chilling confirmation. Elias Vance was watching. He knew I was the one who had accessed the vault. The game was no longer theoretical. It was immediate and dangerous. I deleted the message immediately, feeling a surge of paranoia. Could Julian or Marcus have tipped him off? Unlikely, given the panic they were in. It meant Vance had eyes and ears inside the bank, or perhaps even closer. I arranged the meeting with Elias Vance through his corporate assistant, offering a cryptic reference to the 1979 Lowry matter. The response was immediate and affirmative. He wanted to meet the next day at a neutral location, a high-end, anonymous private club downtown. I spent the evening preparing, not just mentally, but visually. I couldn't walk in looking like the mechanical drafter who spent his days covered in graphite dust. I borrowed one of Julian's less ostentatious suits. It was slightly too large, but it projected an image of competence. I reviewed the contingency contract again, focusing on the language surrounding the 1979 ledger. The contract was brilliantly written, designed to be airtight. The next afternoon, the club was hushed and opulent, smelling of aged whiskey and power. Elias Vance was waiting in a secluded booth. He was younger than I expected, perhaps late 30s, impeccably dressed, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He didn't offer a handshake. "Mr. Lowry," he said, his voice smooth, cultured, but carrying an unmistakable edge of superiority. "I confess I expected one of your more established brothers. Julian, perhaps? Or Marcus." "They sent me," I replied, sitting down opposite him, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "I am handling the 1979 matter." Vance smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "The mistake contingency. A fascinating piece of corporate history. Your grandmother was a desperate woman. She was a survivor," I countered. "And she left a final condition. The codicil." Vance leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Ah, the final test. Yes, I received my copy. She challenged me to prove you are a mistake, Mr. Lowry, a rather theatrical flourish, even for Ilara. And you accepted the challenge, I stated. Of course. It's excellent leverage. It means I don't just get the assets. I get the satisfaction of dismantling your family's legacy through its weakest link. You, the drafter, the one who never belonged. He paused, letting the insult hang in the air. I understand you received 0 inheritance. That must sting. It gave me clarity, I said, meeting his gaze. She protected me from your claim. But you're missing something, Mr. Vance. You're focused on the $68 million, but the contingency is tied to the 1979 ledger. That ledger contains the original loan, yes, but it also contains the repayment schedule. Vance's smile faltered slightly. I pressed my advantage. The contract states that if the 2023 growth targets are missed, you claim the assets. But it doesn't void the original loan repayment obligations. Lowry Holdings still owes the principal, regardless of the contingency. Vance laughed, a short, sharp sound. We own the debt now, Mr. Lowry. We own the paper. Do you? I asked, pulling out a single sheet of paper, a printout of a public filing I had discovered that morning. In 2005, during a major refinancing effort, Lowry Holdings transferred the servicing rights of the 1979 loan to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. That shell corporation was dissolved in 2018. The debt servicing rights were never formally transferred. Back to Vance Asset Management. You own the contingency claim, but you do not own the right to collect the principal. He thought he'd won, but he hadn't counted on one thing. He hadn't counted on my ability to trace the ghost of a paper trail. Elias Vance's composure finally cracked. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, the smooth mask of superiority momentarily slipping. That's a technicality, Lowry. A shell corporation dissolved years ago. The debt is clearly owed to the original lender, which is now my estate. Is it? I challenged, my voice steady. The contingency is based on the 1979 ledger. If the debt servicing rights were transferred out, even temporarily, and then the shell dissolved without a formal transfer back, the debt is currently in legal limbo. You are claiming assets based on a contract that refers to a debt you cannot legally prove you hold the collection rights to. I had found the flaw in Ilara's airtight contract. She hadn't created the loophole. She had simply failed to close it during the 2005 refinancing. It was a drafter's error, a missing line on a complex blueprint. Vance took a deep, controlled breath, regaining his footing. Even if that were true, the contingency is still active. The growth targets were missed. The assets are mine. The codicil states you must prove I am a mistake, I reminded him. If I successfully defend the company, the contingency is voided. My defense is this. Your claim is invalid because the underlying debt structure is compromised. I am prepared to tie this up in litigation for a decade, arguing debt ownership, contract interpretation, and the validity of the 2005 transfer. I paused, letting the implication sink in. Vance was a predator. He wanted a quick, clean kill. Litigation was the antithesis of his strategy. You want the $68 million, Mr. Vance, I continued, leaning closer. But you will spend $20 million in legal fees and 5 years in court trying to prove you own the debt, before you even get to the contingency claim. And by then, I will have restructured Lowry Holdings so thoroughly that the 1979 ledger assets are unrecognizable. Vance stared at me, his gaze intense, calculating. He had underestimated me, the quiet drafter. He had expected a panicked brother, not a meticulous analyst who had spent days tracing the ghosts of corporate paper trails. What do you want, Lowry? He finally asked, his voice low and dangerous. A payout? A fraction of the inheritance? I want the contingency contract destroyed, I stated clearly. And I want the original promissory note from 1979 burned. You walk away with nothing, and you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding this entire affair. In return, I will ensure Lowry Holdings pays the remaining principal of the 1979 loan directly to Vance Asset Management within 90 days. I was offering him a clean, immediate win on the debt principal, which was far less than the $68 million, but guaranteed and without litigation risk. He got his money back. I saved my family's fortune and reputation. Vance considered the offer, his fingers tapping softly on the table. You are more capable than your grandmother gave you credit for, Mr. Lowry, or perhaps she knew exactly what she was doing when she left you the mistake box. He nodded slowly. I accept, but I want the principal payment secured immediately, and I want the destruction of the documents witnessed by my legal team. I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost buckled my knees. Agreed. The meeting was over. I had won the first and most crucial battle. As I stood to leave, Vance offered a final, unsettling warning. Tell your brothers they owe you everything, Raymond, and tell them to be careful what they inherit next. I saw something that made my stomach drop. Vance's parting words weren't a threat. They were a cryptic clue about the true nature of the $68 million inheritance. The resolution with Elias Vance was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the lawyers met. The contingency agreement and the promissory note were shredded, witnessed by both sides. Lowry Holdings wired the remaining principal of the 1979 loan to Vance Asset Management. The $68 million inheritance was safe, secured by my meticulous analysis and my willingness to step into the fire. I met Julian and Marcus back at the ancestral home. They were ecstatic, relief pouring off them in palpable waves. Julian clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of genuine, if clumsy, gratitude. Raymond, you saved us. I don't know how you did it, but you did. We owe you. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, immediately started talking about compensation. We need to bring you into the company, Raymond. A directorship, a significant stake. No, I said, holding up a hand. I don't want a stake in Lowry Holdings. I want to remain the drafter. I want my quiet life back. I didn't need their money or their validation. My reward was the knowledge that I had succeeded in Ilara's final test, proving I was not a mistake. But Vance's parting words still echoed in my mind. Asterisk, be careful what they inherit next. I looked at my brothers, at the $68 million they had almost lost. I realized the money wasn't just a fortune. It was a burden, a continuation of Ilara's ruthless legacy. Before you celebrate, I said, my voice serious, I need to tell you what I found in the documents. The $68 million isn't just cash and assets. It's tied to a series of offshore investments Ilara made in the early 2000s. Investments that were highly profitable, but highly unethical. I explained that the documents hinted at money laundering and illegal corporate espionage used to secure those investments. Ilara had shielded the company from Vance, but she had left my brothers a ticking time bomb of legal liability. The $68 million was dirty money. Julian, the lawyer, immediately went pale. We need to audit everything. We need to clean this up. Exactly, I said. And that is your responsibility now, not mine. Grandma gave you the fortune, and she gave you the responsibility that came with it. I had fulfilled my obligation to the codicil. I had defended the company. Now I was free to walk away. I left them in the library, arguing over which high-priced firm they needed to hire to scrub their inheritance clean. I drove home, the weight lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer defined by my grandmother's cruelty or my brother's condescension. I was defined by my own competence and my choice to walk away from the toxicity of their wealth. When I arrived home, Clara was waiting. I told her everything, the relief and exhaustion finally catching up to me. She listened, then hugged me fiercely. "You did the right thing, Raymond. You saved them, but you saved yourself more." I finally felt peace. I was ready to close the book on Ilara Lowry. But the next morning, a registered letter arrived. It was from Mr. Henderson, the solicitor. It contained a small sealed envelope. Inside was a final, handwritten note from Grandma Ilara, dated the day before she died. It was addressed to me. My final words, Raymond. The final letter was short, written on thin, almost translucent paper, her elegant script shaky this time. I opened it with a sense of profound finality, the air in the room suddenly still. "Raymond, asterisk, if you are reading this, you have solved the puzzle. You found the box, you understood the mistake contingency, and you defended the company. You proved you are not a mistake. You are the only one who ever truly understood the blueprints. Asterisk, the $68 million was bait. It was a test of character for Julian and Marcus, and a test of competence for you. They will be consumed by cleaning up the mess I left them. They inherited the burden of my sins. You inherited freedom. Asterisk, but there is one last thing you must know. The mistake was not you. The mistake was the lie I told Silas Vance in 1979. I didn't tell him your mother was carrying a girl. I told him she was carrying twins. One boy, one girl. I only presented Marcus and Julian as my grandsons. I hid the existence of your twin sister Miriam from everyone, even your mother, for years. My world tilted. A twin sister, Miriam, hidden. Asterisk, she was born premature weak. I sent her away immediately after birth to a private clinic in Switzerland, funded by a separate trust. I told everyone she died. I did this because Vance wanted the firstborn son of the next generation. If he knew there were two children born in 1979, he would have claimed both. I protected her by erasing her. Asterisk, the M on the key is for Miriam. The safe contained the tape, the contract, and the location of her trust fund. I left you the responsibility to find her and to give her the life I stole from her. Asterisk, she is 44 now. She believes her parents died when she was an infant. The trust is substantial, but she needs her family. She needs you, Raymond. Find her. Ilara. I dropped the letter, the thin paper fluttering to the floor. A twin sister, Miriam. All those years of feeling like the odd one out, the anomaly, and I had a twin hidden away, erased from history to secure a corporate loan. The emotional impact was staggering, rewriting my entire history. The zero inheritance, the mistake label, it was all a facade to protect a secret twin. I immediately called Mr. Henderson. He confirmed the existence of a highly confidential, offshore trust established in 1979, designated for a beneficiary named Miriam Lowry. He had been instructed to only release the details to Raymond Lowry upon the successful resolution of the Vance contingency. The information was overwhelming. I had saved the family fortune, but the real task, the true responsibility, was just beginning. I had to find Miriam. I had to tell her the truth, that her grandmother was a ruthless corporate titan, that her twin brother was a mechanical drafter, and that her existence was the ultimate secret weapon in a decades-long financial war. I looked at the brass key again, the mim now shining with a new, profound meaning. It wasn't about money. It was about family, about the cost of ambition. I had to tell Clara. I had to tell my brothers. But first I had to find the location of the Swiss clinic. I needed to trace the final, most delicate blueprint of Grandma Ilara's life. I saw something that made my stomach drop. The trust documents included a recent address update for Miriam Lowry. She wasn't in Switzerland anymore. She was living in the United States, only 3 states away. The journey to find Miriam was the quietest, most profound trip of my life. I didn't tell Julian or Marcus yet. I needed to meet her first, twin to twin, without the chaos of the Lowry legacy descending upon her. Clara came with me, her presence a steady anchor in the swirling storm of revelation. Miriam Lowry lived in a small coastal town, running a successful pottery studio. She had built a life of quiet artistry, far removed from the corporate cutthroat world of Lowry Holdings. The address led us to a charming, slightly ramshackle house overlooking the ocean. I stood outside the studio, the scent of salt air and damp clay filling my lungs. I was terrified. How do you tell someone they were a corporate secret, a human asset stripped from their family before they could even breathe? I walked in. The studio was filled with beautiful, asymmetrical ceramics. Miriam was at a wheel, her hands covered in gray clay, concentrating fiercely. When she looked up, my breath caught in my throat. She had my eyes, the pale, watery blue but framed by a softer, more open expression. She was the mirror image of me, the same bone structure, the same slight furrow in her brow when she concentrated. She wiped her hands and approached me, a gentle curiosity in her eyes. "Can I help you?" "My name is Raymond Lowry," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think we might be related." I showed her the photograph of Grandma Ilara, then the copy of the trust document, and finally, the small tarnished brass key with the Yimnid etched into it. I told her the story, slowly, carefully, omitting none of the harsh truths. I told her about the contingency, the lie, the protection, and the final test. Miriam listened, her face transforming from confusion to shock, then finally, to a quiet, profound understanding. She didn't cry or scream. She simply absorbed the information, her artistic temperament allowing her to see the pattern, the structure of the betrayal. "My whole life," she whispered, touching the key I held out to her. "I always felt like a piece was missing, like I was a draft that never got finished." "You were finished," I said, my voice cracking. "You were just hidden. And you weren't a mistake, Miriam. You were the most valuable asset of all." I gave her the trust documents. The funds were immense, enough to secure her life tenfold. But more importantly, I gave her the truth. She looked at the documents, then back at me. "So you saved the family fortune, but you walked away from it," she observed, a slight smile touching her lips. "I saved myself," I corrected her. "And I found you?" That was the real responsibility. Miriam and I spent the rest of the day talking, filling in the 44-year gap in our shared history. We were different. She was intuitive and artistic. I was analytical and structured, but the connection was immediate and undeniable. I returned home a transformed man. I was no longer the overlooked youngest brother, the family drafter. I was the one who solved the final, impossible blueprint. I had faced the darkest parts of my family's legacy and chosen light. My brothers are now wrestling with the ethical fallout of their inheritance, hiring high-powered lawyers to sanitize their $68 million. They are consumed by responsibility. I am consumed by freedom and by the quiet, profound joy of knowing my twin sister. I still work as a mechanical drafter. I still draw precise lines and build perfect structures on paper. But now, my life has a new, beautiful asymmetry. The scent of old leather and mothballs is gone, replaced by the scent of salt air and wet clay. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in millions, but in the integrity of the lines you draw and the connections you choose to keep. Grandma Ilara wanted to see if I was worthy. I proved I was. And in doing so, I finally drew my own life's blueprint.